Scoutmaster Myers was not always the giant terrifying skeleton that suddenly appears when you leave your friends behind and peek. Before all of that, Myers was a normal scoutmaster who had spent more than 40 years as a scout leader. He had years of experience in the wilderness, and he took his job extremely seriously. He wasn't just some guy telling scouts what to do. He genuinely believed that his scouts were his responsibility, and that if something happened to them, he had failed as their leader. He wrote down his knowledge and experiences in his journal, leaving behind pages that scouts can discover throughout the island. There are 8 known journal entries, covering things like the island, mushrooms, campfires, strange occult discoveries, the cold, knapberries, being left behind, and finally Rule 0. The later pages are especially important because they slowly reveal what actually happened to Myers. Myers and his troop eventually ended up on the mysterious island after their expedition went horribly wrong. Their ship crashed, leaving the scouts stranded with basically one option: climb the giant mountain in the middle of the island and hope they could somehow reach safety. Myers was still trying to be a good scoutmaster. He kept writing, kept observing the island, and kept trying to understand the weird things happening around them. And honestly, the island was already incredibly suspicious. There were strange plants, strange creatures, bizarre statues, and things happening that definitely weren't normal wilderness survival. But Myers kept going. He had his scouts with him, and as long as everyone stayed together, there was still hope. Myers' philosophy was basically simple: stay together, help your friends, and keep climbing. And that brings us to the most important thing in his entire story, Rule 0. Never abandon a friend in need. This wasn't some random rule written for fun. Rule 0 was extremely important to Myers. It was the foundation of how he believed a scout should behave. If someone fell behind, you helped them. If someone was injured, you went back for them. If someone was in trouble, you didn't just keep climbing because you wanted to reach the top faster. You stayed together. And then Myers made the mistake that would completely change his fate. During the journey, Myers encountered a knapberry. The fruit caused him to become extremely sleepy, and eventually he fell asleep. And while Myers was unconscious, his troop continued moving. When Myers finally woke up, the scouts were gone. He was alone. Completely alone. And this is where his story gets really depressing, because Myers didn't just think, "Oh, they're probably ahead of me." He believed they had abandoned him. His own scouts had broken the very rule he had spent decades teaching them. They had left their scoutmaster behind. The journal entries reveal the importance of this moment, and the later left behind in Rule 0 entries make the connection between Myers' fate and his rule incredibly clear. Imagine being Myers for a second. You've spent 40 years teaching people to never leave someone behind. You've spent your entire life protecting scouts. You're stranded on a mysterious island. You fall asleep because of a strange fruit. You wake up, and everyone is gone. No explanation. No rescue. Nobody coming back. Just you and the mountain. Myers continued on, but eventually he died alone in the wilderness. And unfortunately, dying wasn't the end for him. His spirit remained connected to the island, and somehow Myers became the terrifying scoutmaster that players encounter in Peak. That's why the scoutmaster doesn't feel like a normal enemy. He isn't a boss waiting at the end of a level. He's basically the physical manifestation of the worst possible thing that happened to Myers: abandonment. In multiplayer, if a scout strays too far from the rest of the group, the scoutmaster can appear and chase them down. The game literally punishes you for leaving your friends behind. There's even a visual distortion and a terrifying sound before Myers appears, and if he catches you, he can grab you and throw you down the mountain. And there is another way to summon him: the Scoutmaster Bugle. It's a rare item, and blowing it summons Myers to chase the player. The Scoutmaster isn't a normal enemy that you can fight and defeat. You can't just pull out a weapon and kill him. He's basically an unstoppable supernatural punishment. And that's actually what makes his story so interesting. Myers is enforcing the same rule that his own troop broke. He spends his afterlife hunting scouts who abandon their friends because that's exactly what happened to him. It's almost like he's trapped in the same moment forever. Someone separates from the group, Myers appears, and suddenly that scout learns the lesson that Myers wanted his original scouts to understand: stay together. Don't leave people behind. But then came the final ascent. And this is where Peak suddenly goes from funny co-op climbing game to something that feels like a full-on ending to a character's story. The new final content introduces Nader, and Nader is incredibly important because it gives scouts a chance to discover what happened to Myers beyond simply becoming the monster that chases them. The scouts can actually find Myers' trapped soul. And yes, you can actually free him. The Rule 0 secret ending is tied directly to Nader, and escaping Nader grants the Rule 0 badge if you haven't already earned it and triggers the secret ending. To make this happen, the scouts need to gather the required gem amulets during their journey. Once they have what they need, they can finally reach Myers and free his soul. And think about the symbolism here. Myers was abandoned by his scouts. He died alone. His soul became trapped. His entire existence became centered around making sure nobody else would break Rule 0. Then another group of scouts comes along and does the exact opposite of what happened to him. They don't leave him behind. They go looking for him. They collect what they need. They make the dangerous journey. And they come back for their Scoutmaster. That's the moment where Rule 0 finally becomes more than just a rule. The scouts are actually proving it. They are saying, we're not leaving you here. They free Myers' soul. And then they continue toward the final escape. This is where the ending gets really cinematic. The scouts reach the top, and there's a helicopter waiting. But this time, the story isn't just about the scouts escaping the island. Myers gets to be part of it. The Scoutmaster who spent all those years trapped on the island finally has a chance to leave. The scout looks toward Myers and says, Scoutmaster Myers, we made it. Scoutmaster Myers says, after all these years, I finally get to leave. The scout says, you're not staying behind. Not this time. Myers looks toward the mountain and says, I thought I had been forgotten. The scout says, we found you. Myers says, why did you come back for me? The scout says, because you're one of us. Myers says, after everything that happened. The scout says, you're still our Scoutmaster. Myers stays quiet for a moment. He looks toward the helicopter. Scoutmaster Myers says, you know what happened to me. The scout says, we know. Myers says, then you know why I couldn't let anyone leave me behind again. The scout says, we understand. Myers says, for years, I thought Rule 0 had failed me. The scout says, maybe Rule 0 didn't fail you. Maybe the scouts did. Myers looks at the scout. Scoutmaster Myers says, then you remembered it. The scout says, never abandon a friend in need. Myers says, that's what makes you scouts. The helicopter begins preparing for takeoff. The scout looks at Myers and says, come on, Scoutmaster. It's time to go home. Myers looks confused for a moment and says, home. The scout says, yeah, home. Myers looks back at the island. Scoutmaster Myers says, I spent so many years looking at this mountain. The scout says, you don't have to look at it anymore. Myers says, I thought this island would be the last thing I ever saw. The scout says, it isn't. Myers asks, then what will I see? The scout says, the sky. Myers slowly walks toward the ladder. Scoutmaster Myers says, I never thought I'd climb this ladder. The scout says, you don't have to climb it alone. Myers looks at the scout and says, you really mean that, don't you? The scout says, of course. Myers takes another step. Scoutmaster Myers says, then maybe I was wrong. The scout says, about what? Myers says, maybe I wasn't completely forgotten. The scout says, you weren't. Myers reaches the ladder. He looks back at the island one final time. Scoutmaster Myers says, goodbye, Peak. The scout says, ready to go, Scoutmaster. Myers says, more than you know. The helicopter begins lifting into the air. The island slowly becomes smaller beneath them. Myers watches the mountain disappear into the distance. After all those years, he is finally leaving the place where his life ended. Scoutmaster Myers says, all those years, all that time. The scout says, it's over now. Myers says, I can finally rest. The scout says, you can. Myers says, thank you. The scout says, for what? Myers says, for coming back. The scout says, that's what scouts do. Myers looks toward the horizon. Scoutmaster Myers says, I spent my life telling scouts never to abandon their friends. The scout says, and now you know we listened. Myers says, not the scouts I knew. The scout says, no, but us. Myers smiles. Scoutmaster Myers says, yes, you. The scout looks toward the horizon and says, you're coming with us. Myers says, then perhaps this really is the end of my journey. The scout says, no, Scoutmaster. It's the beginning of the next one. Myers smiles again. Scoutmaster Myers says, then let's go. The helicopter disappears into the distance. The island is left behind. The mountain is left behind. And Scoutmaster Myers is finally free. His story started with a Scoutmaster who believed that no friend should ever be abandoned. It continued with him becoming the victim of the very rule he taught. It turned him into the terrifying creature that punished scouts for making the same mistake. But in the end, another group of scouts finally gave him what he had been missing for all those years. They remembered him. They found him. They went back for him. They freed him. And they took him home. Scoutmaster Myers says, I waited a long time for someone to remember Rule 0. The scout says, we never forgot. Scoutmaster Myers says, then I can finally go home. The helicopter continues flying away from the island. And for the first time in decades, Myers isn't looking back because he doesn't need to. He's finally free. Rule 0 wasn't just a rule. It was a promise. And this time, the scouts kept it. Never abandon a friend in need. Not even when that friend is the Scoutmaster himself. The end.